At 12 minutes past 10 on the morning of March 28, 1942, more than 40 German officers stood aboard the deck of what appeared to be a wrecked British destroyer. The ship had rammed the gates of the largest dry dock in the world just hours earlier, and now these men, engineers, naval officers, and curious officials, were inspecting their prize. They poked through compartments, they searched for souvenirs, some posed for photographs. None of them knew they were standing on 4.5 tons of high explosives. In a German interrogation room less than a mile away, Lieutenant Commander Stephen Beatty, captain of that very ship, sat opposite a German naval officer who was taunting him. Crashing a ship into dock gates, the German said, would accomplish nothing of lasting value. The damage would be repaired within days. Then the world split apart. The explosion that tore through HMS Campbeltown killed every German on board and dozens more on the dockside. The massive steel caisson gate, 160 tons of engineering designed to hold back the Atlantic, was obliterated. Seawater thundered into the empty dock. Beatty, his interrogation room shaking from the blast, turned to his captor with a thin smile. "We're not quite as foolish as you think," he said. This is the story of Operation Chariot, a mission so audacious that German commanders dismissed the very possibility of its existence, yet so devastating that it would alter the strategic balance of the entire Atlantic War. It is a story of 600 men who sailed into almost certain death, of courage that transcended ordinary human limits, and of a single night that would earn more Victoria Crosses than any other operation of the Second World War. To understand why Britain would sacrifice so many young men for a single French port, we must first understand the nightmare that haunted Winston Churchill in the winter of 1942. Her name was Tirpitz. Germany's newest battleship displaced over 50,000 tons fully loaded. She could make 30 knots. Her 8 15-inch guns could hurl shells weighing nearly a ton more than 20 miles. She was at that moment the most powerful surface warship afloat. And in mid-January 1942 she left the Baltic Sea and took up position in the Norwegian fjords. Churchill called her the ship around which the whole strategy of the war turns at this period. He was not exaggerating. The mere existence of Tirpitz forced the Royal Navy to keep 6 battleships, 4 British and 2 American, in constant readiness. Every Arctic convoy sailing supplies to the Soviet Union lived under her shadow. Every calculation of naval strength in the Atlantic had to account for the possibility that at any moment this monster might emerge. But Tirpitz had a vulnerability. If she ventured into the Atlantic and suffered damage, she would need repair. And there was only one dry dock on the entire Atlantic coast of German-occupied Europe large enough to accommodate her. Only one facility from Norway to Spain capable of servicing a ship of her size. That facility was the Forme Écluse Louis Joubert at Saint-Nazaire, known to the British as the Normandie Dock. Built between 1928 and 1932 to service the great French ocean liner of the same name, it stretched 350 meters long and 50 meters wide. Its massive caisson gates could hold back millions of gallons of seawater. Without it, Tirpitz could never risk Atlantic operations. Any damage would require the perilous journey back to Germany through seas patrolled by the Royal Navy. If Britain could destroy that dock, Tirpitz would be neutralized without firing a single shot. But how? The dock was one of the most heavily defended positions in occupied Europe. Over 5,000 German troops garrisoned Saint-Nazaire. 43 anti-aircraft guns protected the port. 28 coastal artillery pieces guarded the seaward approaches. Massive concrete U-boat pens squatted along the waterfront. RAF Bomber Command had tried repeatedly to destroy German warships at similar facilities in Brest, and failed utterly. The technology for precision bombing simply did not exist in 1942. Lord Louis Mountbatten, newly appointed Chief of Combined Operations, was asked to find another way. The plan that emerged from Mountbatten's staff was elegant in its madness. If bombs could not destroy the dock gates, then perhaps a ship could, a ship packed with explosives, driven at full speed directly into those gates and detonated by time-delayed fuses. The vessel would become the largest naval demolition charge in history. They found their weapon in an obsolete American destroyer. USS Buchanan had been built in 1919, a flush-decked four-stacker of the Wicks class, transferred to Britain in 1940 as part of the Destroyers for Bases Agreement. Renamed HMS Campbeltown, she was considered expendable. More importantly, her four distinctive smokestacks, when modified, could be made to resemble a German Mauve-class torpedo boat. The transformation took 10 days at Devonport Dockyard. Workers removed 2 of her 4 funnels and cut the remaining 2 at an angle to match the German silhouette. They stripped away her torpedo tubes, most of her guns, and her depth charge equipment. They installed 8 rapid-firing Oerlikon cannons and added armor plating to protect her bridge. They gutted internal compartments to lighten the ship so she could pass over the shallow mudflats of the Loire estuary. Then came the payload. 24 Mark VII depth charges WAS, each containing 400 pounds of Amatol explosive, were encased in steel and concrete and concealed in the ship's bow. The total charge weighed 4.5 tons. It was positioned behind the forward gun mount, a location calculated to survive the impact of ramming. 3 pencil fuses, using acid delay mechanisms, would trigger detonation approximately 8 hours after activation. Backup fuses were embedded directly in the explosives. The bomb was so well hidden that German engineers would search the ship for hours after the raid and find nothing. But destroying the dock gates alone would not be enough. The pumping machinery that controlled water levels, the winding houses that operated the caisson gates, the lock mechanisms, all of this equipment would need to be destroyed to render the dock permanently unusable. For this, they would need commandos. 265 men, drawn primarily from No. 2 Commando with detachments from 5 other units, would ride into battle aboard Campbeltown, and 16 wooden motor launches. Their mission? Land under fire, assault the dock facilities, demolish every piece of critical infrastructure, and then withdraw by sea. The escape plan was optimistic at best. The same motor launches that delivered them would extract them, if any survived. Command of the naval force fell to Commander Robert Ryder, a 34-year-old officer whose pre-war adventures included sailing a ketch 16,000 miles from Hong Kong to England and leading an Antarctic expedition. The commando force would be led by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, a 41-year-old civil engineer and territorial soldier who commanded No. 2 Commando. Newman was also the Army's light middleweight boxing champion. Both men understood that many of those under their command would not return. On March 6, 1942, Operation Chariot was approved. They had 3 weeks to prepare for an assault on one of the most heavily defended ports in Europe. At 2 o'clock on the afternoon of March 26, the Operation Chariot flotilla slipped out of Falmouth Harbor. 18 vessels carried 612 men toward what many suspected would be their deaths. The journey would cover over 400 miles across the English Channel and down into the Bay of Biscay, a voyage of more than 30 hours through waters prowled by German submarines and aircraft. Luck rode with them from the start. When a German U-boat spotted the convoy the following morning, its commander misreported their course as heading west rather than east. 5 German torpedo boats spent the day searching in entirely the wrong direction. When the flotilla encountered 2 French fishing trawlers who might have reported their presence, both crews were removed and the vessels scuttled. As darkness fell on March 27th, the convoy made its final approach. At 10 o'clock that night, HMS Campbeltown hoisted the German naval ensign, a legitimate ruse of war provided it was lowered before engaging. The crew activated the time delay fuses concealed in her bow. From this moment, the ship had become a ticking bomb. The mouth of the Loire estuary presented a navigation challenge nearly as dangerous as the German guns. The main shipping channel was swept for mines but heavily defended. However, British planners had identified an alternative route, a shallow passage over the mudflats that would bypass the strongest defenses. This route was normally impossible, except during the extreme spring tides that occurred in late March. A submarine, HMS Sturgeon, had been positioned at the estuary mouth as a navigation beacon. At midnight on March 28th, the flotilla crossed the shoals. Campbeltown scraped bottom twice but pulled free. They were inside. The final 6 miles would take them up the river to the dock gates. German searchlights and gun positions lined both banks. The slightest mistake would expose them to devastating fire. At 22 minutes past 1 in the morning, those searchlights blazed to life. The entire convoy was bathed in brilliant white light. A German signal lamp demanded identification. This was the moment the entire mission might have ended. But leading signalman Pike, aboard the headquarters vessel MGB-314, began transmitting a response using German naval codes captured during a raid on Vogsoy 2 months earlier. When German batteries fired a few warning shots, both Campbeltown and the motor gun boat signaled urgently, ship being fired upon by friendly forces. They requested immediate permission to proceed. They were damaged vessels in need of urgent repair. For 6 minutes, the Germans hesitated. 6 precious minutes, while the convoy closed the distance to its target. The ships were now so close that the gunners on the harbor defenses could see individual figures on deck. Then the order came through to the German batteries. Open fire. At 28 minutes past 1, Lieutenant Commander Beatty gave the order that would transform the final moments of the approach into legend. The German ensign came down. The white ensign, the flag of the Royal Navy, rose in its place. Every gun in Saint-Nazaire seemed to open fire simultaneously. Tracers crisscrossed the river in streams of red and green. Shells exploded against Campbeltown's armored bridge. Her Oerlikon gunners answered, spraying fire at searchlights and gun positions. On the motor launches, commandos crouched behind thin plating that offered little protection against 20mm cannon shells. Campbeltown accelerated to 19 knots. Beatty ordered the helmsman to hold course directly for the dock gates, now visible in the glare of searchlights less than a mile ahead. The first helmsman was killed. His replacement was wounded within seconds and had to be relieved. Lieutenant Nigel Tirpitz, the very officer who had designed the ship's explosive charge, took the wheel. Shells tore into the superstructure. Men fell at their guns. Others stepped forward to take their places. The forward gun was silenced when its entire crew was killed. For 6 terrible minutes, Campbeltown charged through the gauntlet. Later analysis would determine that more than 30 direct hits struck the ship during that final approach. At 34 minutes past 1 in the morning, HMS Campbeltown struck the southern caisson of the Normandie Dock at 19 knots. The impact drove her 33 feet onto the gates, crushing her bow but stopping short of the hidden explosives. She came to rest at the precise center of the dock entrance, exactly as planned. Beatty turned to the officer beside him amid the carnage of his ruined bridge. "Well," he said calmly, "there we are, 4 minutes late." Within seconds of impact, commandos were pouring over Campbeltown's crushed bow and onto the dock. Their targets were memorized, rehearsed to the point of muscle memory. Captain Donald Roy led his assault troop, wearing regimental kilts, against the massive pump house. Lieutenant Stuart Chant, already wounded in the knee, and both hands by shrapnel, led his demolition team down into the pumping machinery and placed 40 pounds of explosives on the irreplaceable equipment that controlled the dock's water levels. In the winding houses that operated the caisson gates, more demolition teams planted their charges. At fuel storage facilities, at electrical substations, at every piece of infrastructure essential to the dock's operation, commandos worked with desperate efficiency. 90-second fuses were lit. Within minutes of Campbeltown embedding herself in the gates, the demolition mission was essentially complete. But the men aboard the motor launches faced a different reality entirely. The wooden-hulled Fairmile boats, each carrying 500 gallons of high-octane fuel, were catastrophically vulnerable to the German fire. In the 4 minutes surrounding Campbeltown's ramming, 8 motor launches were destroyed in the channel. ML-268 was blown apart so completely that only 1 man survived from her entire complement. Motsu 192 became a floating inferno. Only 6 men escaped. ML-262, carrying the team assigned to demolish the bridge over the old entrance, vanished in flames with almost all hands. Men died in ways too terrible to describe. Thomas O'Leary, aboard ML-446, watched a young commando admire the colored tracer fire, red and green streams arcing through the darkness. A moment later, that same commando was dead, the back of his head destroyed by a shell fragment. O'Leary dropped below decks, where bullets were punching through one side of the hull and out the other. Of the 16 motor launches that entered the river, only a handful would escape. Commander Ryder, observing the carnage from his headquarters vessel, went ashore briefly to confirm that Campbeltown was properly positioned and scuttled. Satisfied that the ship would not be moved, he returned to MGB 314 to direct the withdrawal. Able seaman William Savage manned the forward 2-pounder pom-pom, engaging shore batteries and enemy vessels despite continuous fire and no protection whatsoever. His accurate shooting suppressed gun positions that threatened the surviving craft. By 2:30, Ryder surveyed the disaster unfolding around him. 7 or 8 motor launches were burning in the estuary. The Old Mole jetty, designated as the primary evacuation point, had been recaptured by German reinforcements. The old entrance to the basin was clearly in enemy hands. The commandos still fighting ashore could not be evacuated by sea. There was nothing more we could do for them, and Ryder would later report. He ordered the surviving vessels to withdraw. MGB 314 and a handful of motor launches made smoke and ran for open water, continuously illuminated by searchlights, continuously engaged by shore batteries. 4 miles offshore, a final German salvo straddled them. Able seaman Savage was killed at his gun, still firing. Ryder's vessel, packed with dead and wounded, somehow survived. That it reached open water at all seemed nothing short of miraculous. On the docks of Saint-Nazaire, approximately 100 commandos remained alive. Many were wounded. Their ammunition was running low. Their planned evacuation points were in enemy hands. German reinforcements were flooding into the area. Lieutenant Colonel Newman gathered the survivors and delivered 3 orders that would become legendary. Do your best to get back to England. Do not surrender until all ammunition is exhausted. Do not surrender at all if you can help it. Major William Copeland, second in command of No. 2 Commando, approached Newman with his entire team wounded around him. "Shall we call it a day?" Newman asked. Copeland's answer was immediate. "Certainly not, Colonel. We'll fight our way out." What followed was what survivors would call the Saint-Nazaire steeplechase. Newman led a charge from the dock area, fighting through warehouses and around the massive concrete U-boat pens. They reached a bascule bridge connecting the old town to the new, later known as the Bridge of Memories, and stormed across under machine gun fire. But German roadblocks sealed off the town. Small groups of commandos fought through narrow streets as dawn broke, outnumbered and outgunned. By mid-morning, ammunition exhausted, the last organized resistance ended. Some men hid in cellars and outbuildings. 5 commandos would eventually escape through France to Spain and make their way back to England. The rest were prisoners or dead. But the mission was not yet complete. Throughout the morning of March 28th, German officers swarmed over the wrecked Campbeltown. They searched her compartments. They examined her damage. They debated how to remove her from the dock gates. 40 senior officers, including the senior naval artillery commander and his staff, were aboard or standing on the dockside when, at approximately noon, the pencil fuses finally completed their work. 4.5 tons of amytal detonated with a force that was heard miles away. The explosion destroyed the forward half of the ship and completely obliterated the massive caisson gate. The shockwave killed every German on board and dozens more on the dock. Seawater poured into the dry dock. 2 German tankers moored inside were swept away or destroyed. The Normandie Dock, the only facility in occupied Europe capable of servicing the Tirpitz, ceased to exist as a functional installation. Lieutenant Commander Beatty, sitting in his interrogation room, heard the blast that validated everything he and his men had sacrificed. When he smiled and delivered his famous response, he knew that however many of the crew had died, they had not died in vain. But the explosions were not finished. 2 days later, at 4:30 on the afternoon of March 30th, delayed action torpedoes fired by motor torpedo boat 74 detonated at the old entrance to the basin. The explosion triggered pandemonium. German guards, believing a second British attack was underway, opened fire on French workers fleeing the dock area, their khaki work clothes mistaken for British uniforms. In the chaos, German soldiers shot at each other. French civilians died by the dozens. The Kriegsmarine commander ordered the entire harbor area sealed. Searches for additional hidden explosives continued for days. The psychological impact exceeded even the physical damage. The cost of Operation Chariot was severe. Of 612 men who sailed from Falmouth, 169 were killed and 215 captured. Only 228 returned to England. The commando casualty rate exceeded 70%. But what they accomplished changed the course of the Atlantic War. The Normandie Dock remained inoperable until 1948, 6 years after the raid and 3 years after the war ended. The German Navy lost its only Atlantic repair facility capable of servicing its largest warships, and Tirpitz, the monster that had haunted Winston Churchill, never entered the Atlantic. Never. For the remaining 2.5 years of her existence, she remained bottled up in Norwegian fjords, occasionally threatening Arctic convoys, but never daring the Atlantic operations for which she had been designed. Without a repair facility to fall back on, the risk was simply too great. On November 12, 1944, RAF Lancaster bombers finally found her in Tromsø Fjord. 12,000-pound tallboy bombs capsized the great battleship where she lay at anchor. She killed more than 1,000 of her own crew when she rolled over, never having fired her main guns in a major surface engagement. The men of Operation Chariot had neutralized her 2.5 years before anyone dropped a bomb. The raid on Saint-Nazaire produced 5 Victoria Crosses, more than any other single operation of the Second World War. Commander Ryder received his for directing operations under fire with complete disregard for his own safety. Lieutenant Commander Beatty received his for navigating his doomed ship through impossible conditions and ramming the gates precisely as planned. Lieutenant Colonel Newman received his for leading the commandos ashore and conducting the fighting withdrawal. 2 Victoria Crosses were posthumous. Able seaman William Savage, killed at his gun during the withdrawal, was honored for his devastating, accurate fire that protected the surviving vessels. And Sergeant Thomas Durant received perhaps the most remarkable Victoria Cross of the war. When Motor Launch 306 encountered the German torpedo boat Jaguar during the withdrawal, Durant manned an exposed Lewis gun and engaged the enemy destroyer at point-blank range. Wounded repeatedly, he refused to stop firing. The German commander demanded surrender twice. Both times, Durant answered with bursts of gunfire. He continued shooting until the motor launch was boarded, by which time he had been hit 16 times in the head, arms, legs, chest, and stomach. He died of his wounds the following day. But here is what makes his Victoria Cross unique. It was recommended by the enemy. Captain Lieutenant Paul, commander of the Jaguar, was so moved by Durant's courage that he sought out Lieutenant Colonel Newman in a prisoner of war camp and described what he had witnessed. "You may wish," Paul said, "to recommend this man for a high decoration." It is one of only 3 Victoria Crosses in British military history to be awarded on an enemy's recommendation. The relationship between Saint-Nazaire and the men who raided it endures to this day. French civilians who witnessed the operation and who suffered in its aftermath have honored British veterans for more than 80 years. A granite monument stands near the old dock, bearing tribute to the commandos who came. A cannon recovered from HMS Campbeltown is displayed overlooking the Loire. Each year, ceremonies bring together descendants and historians to remember what happened on that extraordinary night. In Falmouth, where the flotilla departed, a memorial bears the words of Lord Mountbatten. "Of all the operations I was involved in during the war, it is without doubt the raid on Saint-Nazaire with which I am most proud to have been associated. It is one of those enterprises which could be attempted only because it seemed in the eyes of the enemy to be absolutely impossible. The enemy did think it impossible. German commanders had dismissed the very idea of a seaborne assault on such a heavily defended position. When asked about the possibility of a commando attack just 1 day before the raid occurred, a German flotilla commander replied that such an operation would be hazardous and highly improbable. Hazardous it certainly was. Improbable, until 600 men in small boats proved otherwise. They called it the greatest raid of all. It was an act of calculated insanity that succeeded precisely because no rational enemy would have believed it possible. 600 men sailed into a fortress defended by 5,000 troops, destroyed the only facility that made German Atlantic battleship operations feasible, and altered the strategic balance of the war. 169 of them died doing it. 215 more endured years in German prison camps. 5 Victoria Crosses hung from their collective courage, an honor exceeded by no other single action of the Second World War. When the survivors finally came home, many carried wounds that would never fully heal, but they carried something else as well. The knowledge that they had accomplished something that mattered, something that changed history, something that would be remembered long after the last of them had gone. HMS Campbeltown lies beneath the waters of the Normandie Dock still, or what remains of her, scattered by the blast that killed her enemies and validated her sacrifice. The dock itself was rebuilt eventually. Ships use it today. But everyone who passes through knows what happened there on a spring night in 1942, when a rusty American destroyer and 16 wooden boats carried 600 men into legend. The greatest raid of all. It earned the name.